The inspiration of this study begins when we were studying another model, a model of infection with intestinal worms. This infection induced a similar response that the allergens induce in allergic people. The response is called a Th2 response. And basically in this response, a special type of immune cells, which are called T cells, they are activated and they produce mediators that induce typical symptoms like chronic inflammation and also a contraction of the smooth muscles that in the lung, for example, induce the contraction of the airways. They induce also the mucus hyperproduction and also fibrosis. So these are typical symptoms of allergic or asthma. When we were studying this worm model, we saw a specific subset of T cells that were increased in this model. And we wanted to study the role of these T cells during allergy responses. And we found that this specific subset of cells were increased during the allergic model. And we found that these cells, they behave as precursors of the pathogenic cells that mediate the symptoms of asthma. What we found is that after allergy sensitization, which is when we expose the individuals to the allergens, these precursors were induced. And even that they do not cause any pathology, they persist in the body. And when the body is exposed to, again, to the allergen, to the same allergen, these precursors can become to pathogenic cells that mediate all the symptoms of the allergic diseases. So we think that if we can target these precursors, if we can somehow prevent the development of the maintenance of survival, we can avoid the generation of the pathogenic cells that induce asthma. The immune response to an allergen begins when you inhale the allergen, and the allergen is going to the lung. So in the lung, there are a specific type of cells that are called dendritic cells, which I call them the teachers. And these dendritic cells, what they do is to take the allergen in the lung, and they migrate to the lymph nodes. So in the lymph nodes, the dendritic cells, they're gonna encounter the T cells. The T cells are the cells that they're gonna produce the mediator, the cells that are the pathogenic cells, so the cells that produce the mediators and induce the asthma or allergic symptoms. So they are in the lymph node, the dendritic cells, they show the antigen to the T cells, and they teach the T cells what to do. So they are telling basically the T cells to produce that mediator that induce asthma. But the dendritic cells, they only survive for a really short period of time, maybe 24 hours or something. So you need to keep the T cells activated for a longer period of time to survive longer. So in the lymph node, you have another type of cells that are called the B cells, which I call them the teacher assistant. What they do is to get these T cells activated after they have been activated by the teachers, which are the dendritic cells. So basically, you have two components, the teacher, dendritic cells, and the B cells, which are the teacher assistant, to get this T cell activated. So now that we know that, we can interfere maybe with the dendritic cells or with the B cells to try to avoid the activation or the survival of these pathogenic T cells, so they can prevent the generation of these pathogenic cells that produce the asthma symptoms. Allergic diseases are inappropriate immune response that the body generates to harmless antigens, which are the allergens, and the body induced to this, in response to these allergens, a response that is called a Th2 response. On the contrary, many virus or bacteria, they induce another type of response, which is called Th1 responses. And these TS1 responses are important to prevent the body, to protect the body from this bacteria and virus, but also are important to inhibit the TS2 responses, the allergic TS2 responses. So what the hygiene hypothesis is telling us is that now that we are living in a more modern cities, we are the environment is too clean. So we are less exposed we are exposed to less bacteria, less virus that induce these TS1 responses. So the consequence of that is we have an excessive TS2 responses that cause allergy. So what our study says that, a project that we are working in the lab is that it's really important early in life to be exposed to many and high dose of microbial products coming from bacteria or virus to prevent the development of these precursors that can develop into pathogenic cells that induce asthma. So it's important to be exposed to microbacterial products to avoid the allergy sensitization, so to avoid the generation of these precursors that can be pathogenic later in life and induce asthma.